Well, hello, I'm Janet Morena, Executive Director of Priests for Life. Welcome to Just Ask Janet. And I'm so excited today because a dear friend of mine and Father Pavone's is joining me today. Of course, you might have heard him a lot on EWTN radio, and he is just in love with the Lord and also out there helping us all get our spiritual act together. So, welcome to the program, Deacon Harold Burke-Sivers. Deacon, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Janet. It's great to be with you. I'm so thrilled to be here.
I'm thrilled to have you. And listen, I'm going to ask you first a little vocational question. All right. I know you were in law enforcement, and tell us briefly about that. But then, how did you make the leap into the diaconate? Okay.
Okay, sure. Um, yeah, so we're immigrants to the United States, born in Barbados, and we're first generation to come to the United States. And so my mom was the first Catholic. She was a convert from Methodism, and I am the first baptized Catholic in my family. So my mom worked really hard to make sure we had great educational opportunities, and I became the first person in my family to go to college. And during college, I had an academic scholarship, but back then at Notre Dame, the only students that got full rides were athletes and PhD students. So I had to take a job on campus, which was interning at the campus police department. And so I was also discerning monastic life at the time. So after I graduated, I continued to work for the police department full time for another year and then joined the monastery. When I discerned out of monastic life, I met my wife, or the woman who ended up being my wife. We moved to the West Coast, and I still felt, and I got back into law enforcement, and I still felt that pull, that tug, that attraction. And so when we got to Oregon, where my wife is from, I discovered the diaconate. And so went through the process, was ordained 19 years ago, and I was working in law enforcement. I was now the chief at the University of Portland. So I was became chief in 2001, was ordained in 2002. And then as time went on, I felt that God was calling me for more. And so that's in 2012, I made the decision to leave my career and to speak and to write full time.
Wow. Now, Deacon Harold, some people don't realize for a married man to pursue the diaconate, his wife is a very integral part of that process, that discernment. And then during the course of the formation, the wives get very involved. Can you tell us a little bit? Because, maybe people are watching right now and some men are saying, maybe God's calling me to this. Or maybe there's a wife watching saying, my husband might make a good deacon. Can you tell us, like, how does that husband-wife thing journey work towards the ordination to diaconate?
That is a great question, Janet. And you're right. The wives do have an integral part and in a very important say in all this as well. In many dioceses, there's a process. So there's something called the propedeutic year, which is a discernment year. Then after that year, that's when the actual formation starts. And then there's the minor orders, right? So there's lector, acolyte, and then call to candidacy, and then ordination. Every step along the way, the wife has to give her yes. And in our diocese, and I know in some others as well, it's a formal process. So before the man goes to the next step, the bishop wants to hear from the wife, yes, my husband can continue. If she doesn't give that yes, then boom, you're done. No questions asked, just like that. So the wife is integral because the church wants to ensure that the husband who is serving, that's what the word deacon means, diakonia in Greek means to serve, that he's serving well in his family with his wife and his children. And God is, the church is discerning whether God is calling this man to use those servant gifts to now expand that to serve the entire church. And so a wife, because that sacrament, the two become one, right? In Genesis chapter 2, that's why it's integral and extremely important that they are one in this decision to move forward in the diaconate.
Wow. And I'm sure your wife must, in the course of serving in the parish you serve in, I mean, she probably gets involved to a certain degree, doesn't she?
Well, there's a spectrum to that as well. There's one end where the wife gives her support 100%. I'm behind you, I support you, but I'm not really interested in serving with you, right? That kind of a thing, because she's doing her own thing, and that's my case. My wife is a clinical therapist, has a full-time practice, and she's doing her own thing, but she's fully, completely supportive of the diaconal ministry that I exercise both in and outside of the parish. And then you have the other end of the spectrum where wives are doing, for example, marriage preparation with their husbands, or they're doing more ministerial type of assisting with their husbands, and then there's a whole bunch in between. So there is a wide spectrum of how wives participate. Although in that propedeutic year, that discernment year, the wives are intimately involved because they're discerning together, and the move forward to diaconal ministry.
Yeah. Well, for any men or wives out there think your husbands are called, this is an opportunity. Start with your parish priest. Talk to him first, and then who knows? God might be calling you. Okay, so now, Deacon Harold, you said you were in law enforcement. And as we know, last year, boy, oh boy, did the boys in blue nationwide take a beating with the, the Black Lives Matter and defund the police mantra we were hearing. And, how did you feel about that, being you were a good cop and so many good cops? How can you respond to that?
Well, not only that, Janet, people don't realize that I was also president of the Western Association of Campus Law Enforcement Administrators. I've had training at FLETC, the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center in Glencoe, Georgia, and also at Quantico at the FBI Academy. And I also was selected by 2 successive governors to be on the Department of Public Safety Standards and Training for the state of Oregon, which trains police officers. So I am intimately involved in the training of police. And so when I saw the video of George Floyd, it made me sick. And I guarantee you, there is no police technique that is taught anywhere where you kneel on someone's neck for 9 minutes. That's ridiculous. I kept saying to myself, get off of him, get off of him. I was kind of yelling at the TV because it was horrific. Now, have I had to put people to the ground? Yes. Have I had to kneel on people? Yes. But you take those actions to protect them and to protect yourself, to keep yourself, others safe. And once they are under control, then everything stops. It's that simple, but that's not what happened there. Here's what I think the problem is. In the police academy, what they don't do, and when you talk about not defund the police, that's ridiculous. Police reform, yes, I'll be the first one to say yes to that. Why? Because the police academy does not do quite a good job of screening bias out of police officers. Yes, there's psychological tests and oral interviews and things like that, but those don't capture fully someone's bias, particularly toward or prejudice towards someone of another race. And so what we're doing is we're teaching these officers techniques, and they're combining these techniques with their bias, and that's what's causing the problem. So I think we need to take a step back and look at how we can better screen for biases and prejudice, and in some cases racism, and do a better job of not only screening those guys out, but identifying it, and maybe through some training and development to help see the humanity in the person standing in front of you.
That's right. I mean, if anything, Deacon Harold, wouldn't you say it's more like don't defund the police? We need more funding of the police so that there is more training post academy down the road, continuing. I was a teacher for like 12 years, New York City Board of Ed. We always had staff development, teacher training ongoing. And so it seems to me no brainer. The police should be budgeted more training. Wouldn't you say that's the solution? More training?
Yes, I would say that. And the thing is this: when you're dealing with people, at least for me, and talking with a number of law enforcement officers, it's difficult to deal with, particularly people with mental health issues or drug issues. Because I remember once myself, we were talking with a guy who was really high, and I was using verbal de-escalation techniques. And my officers were there, and I showed up at the scene because I was training the officers on using verbal techniques and not so much using the other tools that we use in the force continuum, like pepper spray and the aspartame and all that stuff. So I was there verbally de-escalation. It was going great. I'm thought, yes, we have this guy under control. Everything's great. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, he lunges at me. I'm like, oh no. And then bam, we had to take him to the ground and cuff him. But so some of these things are very volatile. And I don't think people realize that or understand that. Most cops out there get it. And they're trying to be good humanitarians when they're dealing with this. But you're right. We need to be trained on when we have someone with a mental health issue, how do we approach that? Someone that's maybe schizophrenic, realizing that some of these people may have served our country as veterans. Some of them may have just hit on bad times. They lost a job and then one thing led to another. Now they're on the street. So we have to see that humanity in the person and realize that we're responding to a situation that this person is causing, but this is a human being made in the image and likeness of God. And so we have to think that way. And what we're trying to do is help the person. We're not trying to hurt them. We're not trying to harm them.
Right.
So I think you're right. I think training needs to be given to officers. We can better be trained to deal with those difficult situations.
Well, and that's kind of like what Mother Teresa said, that the people she would minister to would learn about Jesus by encountering her. And so I think that's what you're saying. It's our way of reaching out to these people. They see that calm officer, that well-trained officer that is not being confrontational initially, but trying to diffuse the situation. So now I'd like to switch gears just a little bit and say, okay, we know all last year we heard about Black Lives Matter. And of course, here at Priest for Life, we want to say all lives do matter. All, races from the womb to the tomb matters. And what can you say about the whole life issue in regard to that? About, we're one human race, one human blood. And, what's your feeling on all that?
Yeah. So what we have to do is we have to separate Black Lives Matter, the words, from the movement. Okay. Because they become conflated. There is nothing wrong with the actual term Black Lives Matter. And of course, as you correctly said, Janet, all lives matter, of course. But we have to be careful here, because when we say the term as a social construct, Black Lives Matter, what we're saying is there's a group of people who recognize that they've been disenfranchised because of slavery and Jim Crow laws and these kinds of things. And they're just bringing attention to the fact that, hey, we're here. We want to hear our voices heard. We have issues that we're dealing with in the culture that we want attention brought to those things so that we can bring healing and reconciliation, so that we can create better opportunities for our families. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. So when people say, well, that doesn't matter, all lives matter, just out of hand, in a sense, you're dismissing the legitimate needs and concerns of a particular group of people. Now, but when you say Black Lives Matter, the organization, that clearly no Catholic can support that. I'm writing about this right now. I'm writing a book called A Civilization of Love, a Catholic response to racism. And I'm pointing out in that book that the organization itself, it really doesn't care about Black Lives Mattering. What it is trying to deconstruct the nuclear family. That's its goal. And it's using Black Lives Matter as a veneer. And the problem is, Janet, is that the Black Lives Matter, the words, social construct, has become conflated and confused with the Black Lives Matter movement. And so now they're all together and people can't separate them out. And so, for example, I was going to do a radio show for a podcast in Australia, in Sydney, Australia. And the guy put out an advertisement on Instagram. Deacon Harold is going to talk about Black Lives Matter, which I was going to explain what I just did now. The words versus the movement. And people automatically thought, just by looking at the advertisements, I was supporting Black Lives Matter movement. And so people started defriending me. They started sending me nasty notes and emails. I'm like, what are you guys doing? And so the guy hosting the show said, should I take it down? I'm like, nope. Because now they have to actually listen to what I have to say about this. So it's become very confused. And so that's what I'm going to attempt to do, Janet, to separate the words from the movement.
Great. And of course, I know President Trump started working on this. the last year of his presidency, making Juneteenth a federal holiday, which finally came into fruition this year. And I have to say, like, I knew about Juneteenth for over a decade or more, very familiar with Juneteenth. But I think finally now nationwide, people are going to learn about Juneteenth. What can you say about that?
Yeah, so for those who don't know what that is, when Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, all of a sudden everybody just wasn't freed like that. So what Juneteenth is, it's celebrating the day when the Emancipation Proclamation finally filtered its way down to the last plantation, and the last slaves were finally freed. And so that was a process. It took a while, and so when we say Juneteenth, that was the day. I think Texas was the state where the
Right.
last slaves were freed, and so now we have always celebrated that in the Black community, but now, as you mentioned, through the efforts of former President Trump, it's now a national holiday. So that, and it's important to remember things like this, just like it's important to remember the Holocaust. We don't want to create the mistakes of the past, and so by remembering them and honoring the people who suffered through them, we try to create again, civilization of love in a society where we are making sure we see the dignity of the human person. That's why the work for Priests for Life is so incredibly important, that we see the dignity of every single human being and not repeat the mistakes of the past. And that's why that day is important.
Right. And of course, we like to say, Deacon Harold, that abortion and the fight for the unborn is the civil rights movement of today. That the baby in the womb is kind of like a slave, right, to the mom. It's up to her whether that child will be born or aborted. What can you say about this whole concept? Do you like that concept we have here at Priests for Life, civil rights for the unborn? What can you say about that?
Well, yes, the thing about it is, Janet, is it's really a life and death issue that's become politicized. I mean, if we're talking about rights for people, and this is a country based on rights for all people, then it should include the most vulnerable of our population, the most vulnerable people, the people that can't speak for themselves, the people that can't help themselves. And so, and that would include, of course, the unborn and those in the womb. And so we live in a culture that tries to rationalize that away. For example, well, it's not really a person, it's a blob of tissue, really. So when you get pregnant and you show your husband the test, oh, we have a brick, we have a slice of pizza, we have a piece of wood, and at some point it'll become a baby. No, nobody does that. Come on, everybody knows it's a life. But what they have to do in order to rationalize taking that innocent life is to say that that is not a person at all. That's what Hitler did. That's what they did during slavery. The Dred Scott versus John F. Sanford decision in 1857 said that Black people were property and not human beings. Of course, you have to say that if you're going to enslave someone, because if you see the person as a human being made in God's image and likeness, then they have rights and you can't enslave them. But by saying they're not human beings, then you can impose your will on them. And that's exactly what happened in this country before 1973, and that's what's happening now. And you're right, the unborn are the should be the new civil rights movement proponents. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, and of course, Deacon Harold, as you know, in the Black community, they are targeted by Planned Parenthood. I know in New York City, where I am originally from, more Black babies are aborted in New York City than are born. And if you look at the demographics of where Planned Parenthoods are, they're like circled around all the Black neighborhoods, like so many of them. I mean, there's one place in downtown LA, Deacon Harold, where I think there's about, between Planned Parenthood and freestanding other abortion clinics, there used to be a dozen. I think they've whittled it down to about 8 in a 2-mile radius. Now, if that's not targeting, what is? I mean, what can you say about that? It's so blatant and obvious. And yet, when you look at the politicians, right, you have the Black Caucus, right, the NAACP, all these Black organizations, they're pro-abortion. And they're helping Planned Parenthood, the very organization that is now training their guns on the Black community. What can we say about that?
Well, here's the thing. Margaret Sanger, without question or without doubt, was a eugenicist. If you read her writings, and I'm going to bring this out very clearly in the book. In fact, in my last book on the legacy of Father Augustus Tolton, the first Black priest in the United States, I do bring out some of those facts about Planned Parenthood. They particularly target the Black race and people of color, and also those with Down syndrome and those kinds of things. They use words like deformities, human waste. We don't want the Black people to know that we're trying to exterminate them. Those are actual terms that are used by Margaret Sanger in her writings. And in the book, I will show you explicitly page numbers, references. All of this is in the Library of Congress. You can look it up for yourself. There's no question she was trying to exterminate Black people. And Planned Parenthood is continuing that today. The problem is we have a lot of Black people who are still slaves. All these politicians are looking out for their own best interests and not looking out for the interests of Black families. If they really cared, they would, look at 70% of Black children born out of wedlock. What about rebuilding strong families? Helping men to understand that this hit it and quit it mentality is not who we are. That we talk about, so we give ourselves African names, wear African clothes, but we don't have the African values. Remember, during the Obama administration, they tried to export contraception. They tried to export abortion. They tried to export all these things to the African countries. The African countries, said, not here. That's not who we are. And so if we're gonna adopt these values, then we should be able to live those out and not politicize them. That's the problem. These are life and death issues that have tremendous import and impact on family life that have become politicized. And any person that supports that, especially from the Black community, and I say Black instead of African American because I'm from the Caribbean, and so technically I am not African American, and I want to speak for all people of Black people of color from different parts of the world that now live here in the United States. If you follow Planned Parenthood, if you adopt that mentality and adopt that philosophy, then you are still a slave.
Wow, that's great. Well, Deacon Harold, too, I also know in your heart is a concept of pilgrimages. And a lot of people have been on pilgrimages, as you know, and you get on the bus and you go see this holy site, get back on the bus, off to the next holy site, back on the bus. But you've got a new vision for what a pilgrimage should look like. Give us your idea about these pilgrimages that you're going to start doing.
Yes, thank you, Jen. As soon as we're able to do them again,
Of course.
yeah. What we're looking at was something called contemplative pilgrimages, and you're right. So often, and it's a beautiful experience when you go someplace, you see these amazing holy sites, places where our Lord walked, where the Blessed Virgin Mary appeared, where the great saints lived their lives and did their work in the Lord's vineyard, and oftentimes it's what we call the hamster wheel. Right, you just off the bus, take pictures, pray a little bit, on the bus, back to the next site. What we want to do is we want to slow that experience down, and we want people to really deepen their intimacy with the Lord during this experience. So we're going to have, maybe visits to one site a day, and spend the rest of the time in adoration, in scriptural rosaries, in confession and Eucharistic adoration, with short vignettes and short talks that draw people deeper into the mystery of the place that we're going to be seeing or visiting that day. We're going to be also doing corporal works of mercy. We're going to be working in soup kitchens and doing things like that to really immerse ourselves in the lives of the culture of the time of the saint or our Lord or our Blessed Mother, and really get a deeper feel for what it's like to really live our Catholic faith with passion and conviction, and be much more prayerful and intimate experience. And so we've put out all together, but because of COVID, we really can't do the first contemplative pilgrimage until 2023, because we're still trying to reschedule the ones that were canceled for the past year and a half due to COVID. But I'm excited to roll that out.
And of course, I'm excited too, because I know you and I are going to be in discussion about a trip maybe in 2023 to the Holy Land. And maybe we'll do a contemplative, okay? Because I don't know, Deacon Harold, if I could be total contemplative, but everyone knows I'm all woo woo action. So maybe we'll do a semi-contemplative because I really want to get back to the Holy Land. So I'm hoping and praying all this goes away. So just quickly, tell us how, if people want to get your books or sign up to say, hey, tell me more about the pilgrimages, where can they go to be involved with you and get your books and get involved?
I made it really easy for everyone, just deaconharold.com. And if you scroll down that first page, you can access everything from my site from that first page. You'll see all my books. You'll see Power in My Hands, the movie I was in about the rosary. You can see the store page has all my CDs, DVDs, which are also downloadable, and also streaming service as well. So everything's at deaconharold.com.
And that's where, too, if they say, hey, Deacon Harold, put me on your pilgrimage list. So
Yep,
when the
you can
time
sign
comes,
up.
we can sign up and know what's going on, right?
Exactly right. Yep, exactly right.
Exactly. And of course, I'm going to have you back because I think we've got a lot more to talk about, you and I.
Oh,
A lot
absolutely.
more
Love
to
to come
talk
back.
about. We've just barely, what should I say, scratched the surface here of what we can be talking about. And listen, I want to thank you, too, for all you do. On race relations, on things for the unborn, and also too about strengthening people in their spiritual lives. I love your concepts of we got to slow things down. Too many of us live in a hamster wheel. And I like that concept, whether it's on a pilgrimage or just in your daily lives. We have to stop the wheel, pick up those rosaries, and be in adoration more. So thank you for joining me today, Deacon Harold. I'm very privileged to have you as my guest here on the program.
Thank you, Janet, for having me. I appreciate it very much.
Okay, God bless. Well, brothers and sisters, thank you too for joining me on Just Ask Janet. And remember what Deacon Harold said, deaconharold.com, very easy. He's got a new book coming out, so he'll be announcing it there. The pilgrimage idea, I know he and I are going to work on a pilgrimage that we can do together. Just so many exciting things. And I also want to remind you that Deacon Harold also does speaking engagements, so be in touch with him. And remember, brothers and sisters, there are some abortions only you can stop, and some lives only you can save. Join me again next time on Just Ask Janet. God bless.